Hello guys, welcome to the third episode, the final one of this playlist where we are talking about Zustand for state management in React applications. So right now what we've got is that we have an application, right, with the basic CRUD operations. So we have a form that we can, as you can see here, right, we have a form to add new employees. Whenever we have a new employee, we can remove that employee, we can edit that employee, and of course we see a list of our current employees. But the problem with the application so far is that whenever you refresh the page, everything is lost. So everything is inside the store implemented inside of the application. And when I say store, I mean this file. So as you can see, this file is our state, is our store right now, and we have like the employees array and some actions. But that's not enough. I mean, whenever, as I told you, we refresh the page, everything is lost. I want to fix that. In this final episode, I want to integrate this simple application with my backend API. So I'm going to have a backend API running on my local machine on port 3000, and that API exposes an endpoint called employees, right? Take a look here, and it supports the simple and basic CRUD operations: get, post, put, and delete. So I've developed that API, with JSON server, which is a package that you can use to, create an API rapidly. So what we are going to do is this. Inside of our front-end application, we're going to install Axios, right? We're going to install Axios. We're going to, use this dependency to communicate with the backend API running on our local machine. And then we're going to change the store developed using Zustand to kind of fetch and update and, communicate with that backend API to kind of update the state of the application. And then the component that I've got, app component, take a look here, this is my app component. The component will also need to go through some updates to be able to fetch that data from the backend. So this is the plan for this last episode of this tutorial. So let's get started. The first step would be to install Axios as a dependency, and then we're going to update our store to use Axios and async actions. So this is going to be the API URL, right? We're running our API on port 3000, localhost. This is the endpoint. I'm importing Axios, and I have added two new, states, loading and error, which help us to indicate whether the application has encountered an error, in its communication with the backend API, or is the application in the middle of loading some data. So if, for example, the application tries to communicate with that API but encounters some error for whatever reason, we would like to notify our user about that error, right? So we can use this flag, this error, object, not a flag, to show the error that the application has encountered. Or if the application is, let's say, in the middle of, fetching some data, again, we would like to notify the user of this state. Or if, for example, the application is submitting the data for adding a new employee, we would like, for example, to disable a button, right? So we can use this flag to enable or disable the add employee button. I'm talking about this button, based on whether the application has this loading state set to true or false. If it is true, it means the application is communicating with the backend. So we're going to disable, for example, that add employee button, and that will prevent the user from, clicking that button multiple times. So it kind of controls the user interface of the application. And then, I mean, if I show you what I've got right now for example, one of these, add employee, as you can see, it is using this array here. It is using this local array. Remove employee, update employee, the same thing. But with Axios installed, I'm gonna change my actions. So for example, I've got this new action, fetch employees. And as you can see, it's an asynchronous action. And it's gonna communicate with that backend API using Axios. It's gonna send a GET request, right? And then it's gonna get the response, as you can see here. And then it's gonna, set some data inside of my state, for example, inside of my, store. For example, it's gonna set this employees array to whatever that backend API returns, right? And it's gonna set this loading state to false because the application has loaded that, data from the backend. So, I mean, at first, when the application enters this, function, we're gonna set loading to true and error to null because we are in the middle of loading, but we haven't encountered any errors yet. And then we try to fetch some data from the backend. So we get some data, right, using Axios, and then we're gonna set our employees array and the loading flag. And if we encounter any errors, right, we're gonna set the error flag or error, object to the message of that error that we are catching here. And then the loading is gonna be false, as you can see here. So this is the pattern that has repeated inside of the add employee. That is the reason why I talked about this, right? So again, in the add employee, the same thing is happening, except for the fact that for add employee, as you can see here, right, whenever I post that new employee to my backend API, I'm gonna update my employees array, which I maintain inside of this store as well. I am going to, add the new employee to the employees array. And of course, I am going to add it to the backend API as well. So this will help us to kind of sync the backend API as well as the data that we maintain locally inside of the store. The same thing for update employee. So for update employee, we're going to send a put request and using the employee ID and the employee itself. And then we're going to update that employees array as well. So as you can see here, we're going to map through that employees array inside of our store. And we're going to find the employee whose ID we are updating. And if we found that, we're going to replace it using response.data. Otherwise, we're not going to touch it. And then we're going to, set false to the loading flag. The same thing happens for remove employee. Whenever we are, after we have sent the delete request using the ID of the employee we are deleting, we're going to remove that employee using the filter flag on our employees array based on the ID as well. So not only we are communicating with the backend API to keep everything, in sync, but also we are updating the local state inside of the application as well. Now, let's get to the code and start implementing these new changes. First off, as I told you, the next step would be to install Axios dependency. This is the first thing we need to do. So we're going to install this. This is done. Then we're going to go to our store, employee, and then we're going to remove this and we're going to write the full version that we just discussed. So let's start writing this. As before, importing create from Zustand, importing Axios from the dependency we just installed, specifying the API URL, creating the store, creating the array and the two extra states, loading and error, and then writing fetch, setting the loading and error states, communicating with the backend using axios.get, setting the local employees array and loading to false, and then catching any potential errors and setting the error and loading flags. The same thing for add employee. Setting the loading state and the error object, communicating with the backend to send a post request and then setting the state. The employees array will be updated with that new employee added, and then catching any potential errors, and then setting the error and loading state. Update, getting an employee as a parameter, setting loading and error, communicating with the backend with a put request, and then mapping through the employees and updating that same employee inside of the array as well. And then setting loading to false, and then catching any potential errors, setting the error object and the loading flag. Last but not least, removing an employee. So setting loading to true, error to null, sending a delete request using Axios, and deleting the same employee using filter function from our employees array, loading to false, and then catching any potential errors, setting the error and loading respectively. So this is the new version of the store. It is a little bit more, involved and, let's say, elaborate and complicated, because it is using Axios, and also it has introduced two new, let's say, states, or one object and one flag. Now, we kind of talked about these two extra states, like loading. So the purpose is to indicate whether an API request is currently in progress or not. We can use it. It's very useful in our component. You can use it in your UI to show a dialog, for example, a loading spinner, or disable form inputs while the request is being processed. Error, which is initially set to null. Its purpose is to store an error message when an API call fails, and this helps, with showing, for example, message when something goes wrong. There is another playlist on my channel about error boundaries. So I think if you watch that playlist after watching this one, that would really help you to deepen your understanding about this error object. So for example, throwing an error from your store, and then you can combine that with an error boundary for your components and show a fallback UI whenever your component encounters an issue. So these are updated, of course, using the set at different points inside of our async function. Now, before each call, as I told you, we're going to set the state. Before each request to the API, we're going to set loading to true and error to null. So this means that we are in the middle of some communication, and there are no errors right now. When we are, when we have completed the operation successfully, we're going to set for example, for fetch, we're going to set the employees array, and we're going to set loading to false. This means that we're done, we're not loading anymore, and here is the data, right? But if, for example, we encounter some issue, we're going to say, you know what? We have encountered some issue. The issue or the message of the error can be found inside of this error, and loading is going to be false. Now, the next step would be to update the app.jsx. So right now, if I show you the app.jsx, this is, by the way, the single component that we have right now. This single component, which can of course be decoupled into separate components, is responsible for offering the user 4 main CRUD operations. So create, update, listing or reading, and then deleting. But right now, as I told you, we're using the functions from the store, and we are communicating with the store, and everything for this component is being handled internally, with local data. So we're going to update that as well. I just want to point out something here. It was also possible for me to not communicate with the Backend API, but rather store everything inside of my store in the local storage of my browser. This is, of course, something that I have done in other courses on my channel. But for this one, I decided to not store anything on my local storage, but communicate with the Backend API. There is also another course on my channel about using Redux in React. In that course, I am communicating with a Backend API developed using .NET. So that is also, another course that you can take. So there are different options when it comes to, managing the data that you maintain inside of your application. So let me remove this. The code that we're going to write is very similar to what we previously had, but of course there are some changes as well because we are going to use that error object as well as the loading flag. So let's import React use state, use effect. Let's import the store. Let's write the component. So the employees array, then the loading flag, and the error object. Next, the actions. So fetch employees, add employee, remove employee, and update employee. And then the local states for the name, position, and department of an employee. And the edit ID to track the ID of the employee we're editing. Then the use effect. Let's first fetch employees, another use effect. If we have some edit ID, it means we need to update an employee. So we're going to set name, position, and department. Otherwise, we're going to reset these local states. The next one, handle, add, or update. So first let's do a simple data validation. And then based on the value inside of edit ID, we can determine whether we want to add employee or update an existing one using the actions we imported from the store and then resetting the local state. Now, handle edit as well as handle cancel as before. You remember from the previous episode, I guess. So now the template, we're going to have our div, the h1, and then if we are in the middle of loading, let's print out this p tag. If we encountered an error, another p tag. And then the inputs. The inputs are bound to those local states. For name, position, and department, we have different, inputs. Now the button, handle, add, or update. We're going to have edit ID as before to render the handle cancel button. And then a UL for listing out the employees we currently have inside of our store. We're going to map through the employees. And for each one, we're going to render the name, position, and department. And then there's going to be a button for editing an employee as well as a button for deleting one. They're going to call this one, remove employee, is going to call the action we imported from the store. And then exporting the component. And that's it. So right now, you can instantly see that these employees are coming from my Backend API because I didn't have anything in my local state. So I am receiving these from my Backend API. Now, let me add one new employee. I'm going to add my own name. And now if I refresh, I'm not going to lose this data because I am getting this data from my Backend API. And of course, it is possible to edit these, right? For example, I can add, let's say, a last name for Alice. I'm going to save this. Department is going to be ID. So Alice Smith is updated. Then, of course, I can remove Alice. I can refresh the application. And I can see that my changes are persisted because I am communicating with that Backend API. So let's take a look at the code as well. I've got some, explanations here, I guess. Let's talk about the things that are different from the previous version of this code. For example, this is the UI, which is rendering the list of employees. Let's take a look at this. First, I am checking whether I've got some employees or not. If I don't have any employees, of course, I'm going to say no employees added yet, right? And of course, I don't want to be in the loading state. So if I am inside of the loading state, I mean, I need to wait to see if I get some employees or not. Maybe I am loading some employees from the backend. But if I am not in the loading state, and if the employees array is empty, then I'm sure that I have loaded everything and there are no employees. So let's, print out this guy to say that no employees added yet. And then the other thing that I think is important is here, right? So first off, if we are in the loading state, I mean, if loading is true, we are going to print out this p tag. And if there is an error, we're going to print out this error. For example, let me do something. I can go to my store and I can change this to something else, right? Now, as you can see, this is the error that we get. So this is the p tag that we rendered here. Where did it go? This is the p tag. It says error and then the request failed with a status code 404. Now let me add that other E character in there. Now let's do something else. Let's see if we can do some, network throttling to see if we can, see that loading state as well. So let me put this to 3G and then I'm going to refresh. You can instantly see that the application flashes, and it's going to show me that if you pause the video, you're going to see that p tag for loading. But because everything is running on my local machine, you're going to see this very quickly. And I kind of noticed that I've got an error inside of my console. No, I'm fine. So yeah, this is it. This is all we've got for, let me see if I can disable cache. No, it doesn't, show me that error, that loading state because it is running quickly. But that's it. Yeah, this is it. I mean, we have incorporated a backend API into our store, and the application is persisting its data using that, store. And then this is the summary. Let's go through the summary as well. So we talked about Zustand. Zustand is a library for handling the state of your application. Right now, our store communicates with the backend API asynchronously using Axios, right? And our React application fetches employees on load and then calls the API for adding new employee, updating, and deleting. And then the UI of the application shows errors and loading state, and then the employee data persists on the backend. So when I refresh the page, nothing is lost. And this is it. That's the end of this playlist. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. From here, you can continue watching the other playlists on the channel. For example, I've got another playlist for testing in React applications, another one for using the basics of Redux for state management, another one for, communicating with a backend API using .NET, developed using .NET. So these are the other playlists that you can watch. Thank you so much again. If you enjoyed watching this series, I'd really appreciate it if you could, give it a thumbs up. And stay tuned for the upcoming videos as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.